I never thought much about the concept of a failing marriage. People always talked about how love faded, how time chipped away at passion, how the small, unspoken grievances built up like dust on a forgotten shelf. But I never imagined that one day I'd be the one standing at the center of it, pulling the strings, setting everything in motion with a single decision. Divorce. It should be simple, right? A clean cut, a necessary step toward a fresh start. I wasn't unhappy, per se, but I wasn't exactly thriving either. My wife, Miranda, had become more of a fixture in the house than a partner. Predictable, dependable, always there. There was a time I appreciated that, maybe even loved it, but things changed. I changed. Maybe it started with the travel. The long business trips, the constant flights between countries, the nights spent in hotels where I could breathe freely. I told myself it was necessary for my career, that I was providing for my family, that the distance was temporary. But deep down, I knew that each trip chipped away at something fundamental in our relationship. I wasn't the same man who had married her 16 years ago. Back then, we had dreams, plans, excitement. Now, we had routines. Miranda had settled into the role of a perfect housewife, always making sure the house was in order, making sure Rufus had everything he needed, making sure my life ran smoothly. And yet, the more she took care of everything, the less I felt needed. She became efficient instead of passionate, reliable instead of thrilling. And then there was Rufus, 16 now, practically an adult. He was never one for open affection, not like he was when he was younger. Now he had his own life, his own friends, his own interests that I barely understood. I convinced myself he didn't need me anymore. He barely reacted when I left for my assignments. Sometimes, I wondered if he even noticed. The first time I entertained the thought of divorce, it felt foreign. A shadow creeping in the back of my mind, an idea that I quickly dismissed. But the more I traveled, the more the idea lingered. I found myself imagining what life would be like if I didn't have to check in, if I didn't have to come back to the same house where nothing ever changed. And then I met her. Vicky was different. She was young, vibrant, full of energy. She looked at me the way Miranda used to, back when we were still newlyweds. She made me feel important again, like I was someone worth noticing. It wasn't long before I started spending more time with her than I should have. And then, one day, she told me she was pregnant. That was the moment I knew things had to change. A man in my position couldn't afford scandal. I wasn't reckless. I planned everything carefully. I knew I had to handle the divorce properly, make sure Miranda and Rufus were out of the house before I made any official moves. I didn't want complications. I didn't want resistance. I wanted a clean break, a simple transition. So, I came home with my plan laid out, my words prepared. I expected shock, maybe a few tears, but ultimately, I expected compliance. Miranda was logical, practical. She'd see reason. She'd accept it. I should have known better. She didn't react the way I expected. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She just sat there, frozen, staring at the divorce papers I placed in front of her. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head, the calculations, the what-ifs. Rufus came home later that night and saw the papers. He didn't throw a fit. He didn't yell or demand answers. He just looked at me, then at Miranda, and walked away. That was when I knew this wasn't going to be as easy as I thought. But it didn't matter. I was determined. The wheels were already in motion. And soon, Miranda and Rufus would be gone, and I would finally be free. Or so I thought. I should have expected it. I should have realized that Miranda would push back. But I didn't. Not at first. I thought everything was moving according to plan. She was taking it all in stride. No arguments, no dramatics. She was just sitting there, frozen, looking at the divorce papers with that blank expression on her face. It almost felt like she was waiting for me to make the first move, maybe, waiting to confirm that this was really happening. But when she spoke, it wasn't what I expected at all. She said nothing for a long moment, then looked up at me with those tired eyes, her voice steady but piercing. "This is so sudden, don't you think?" she asked, a forced calmness in her tone. She wasn't pleading. She wasn't begging. She was asking, as though she were talking about something mundane, something trivial. I felt a flicker of annoyance. "It's not sudden, Miranda. We've been living separately for years now. This is just the final step. I was trying to remain firm, trying to stick to the script I had written in my head. But it was clear that she wasn't going to take it lying down. Not this time. Living separately doesn't mean we were living apart, she retorted. You were on business trips. I stayed home with Rufus. That was the arrangement, wasn't it? I didn't choose this distance. You did. I wanted to snap back, to tell her that she was just making excuses, that I'd had enough of the pretending. But I didn't. Something about her words made me pause. Something about the way she said it made me question if I had been too harsh. For a split second, I almost regretted it. Almost. But I couldn't back down now. I had a future with Vicky, a child to raise. It was time to cut the ties that were holding me back. So, I pushed forward. I handed her the pre-filled divorce form, as though it were just paperwork, as though it were a formality. You don't have to stay here, I said, the words coming out more smoothly than I felt. Sign the papers, and you and Rufus can move out. It's that simple. You've been managing without me for years. It's time for both of us to move on. She didn't take the papers immediately. Instead, she stared at them for a long time, and I could feel my patience starting to fray. I could sense the tension building between us, thicker than before, like something was about to snap. When she finally spoke, her words hit me like a blow. You've planned this, haven't you? This entire divorce. All this talk about the future, about Rufus, about new beginnings. It's all for you and Vicky, isn't it? She didn't sound angry, not exactly. But there was a note of sadness there, something that made me feel guilty. I shook my head, trying to keep my resolve. This has nothing to do with Vicky. It's about us. About you and me. We're done, Miranda. It's time for you to accept that. Her lips tightened, but she didn't respond immediately. She simply picked up the divorce papers, studying them with an intensity that unnerved me. Then, to my surprise, she handed them back to me, saying, I can't sign this. Not yet. I was taken aback. I'd expected her to cry, to beg, to plead for one last chance. But instead, she was challenging me in a way I hadn't prepared for. I couldn't help myself. What is this? Some kind of game? I'm giving you the freedom you wanted. You've been complaining about me being away, about the distance between us. Here's your chance to move on. Why are you stalling? I was losing my cool now. The frustration was getting to me. I needed this to end. She looked at me, her gaze hardening. I'm not stalling. I'm thinking about what happens after. I'm thinking about Rufus. I'm thinking about the future that you've so easily discarded. I didn't respond. What could I say? She was right about one thing, Rufus. This wasn't just about me and her anymore. Rufus had been caught in the crossfire of our failing marriage for years. He'd grown up without me, without the real presence of a father. I'd been absent, physically and emotionally. But he wasn't a child anymore. He was 16. He could handle this. I was sure of it. But Miranda wasn't so sure. Is this really how you want to end things? She asked softly, breaking through the silence. Her voice wasn't pleading. It wasn't even sad. It was just resigned. And that hit me harder than anything else she could have said. Miranda, I said, my voice wavering despite myself. You and I are strangers now. There's no going back. She sighed, her shoulders slumping. You're right, she muttered. We're strangers. But that doesn't mean I have to accept this. Not yet. Not until I'm ready. I wanted to argue, to tell her that we were already too far gone for that. But I didn't. Instead, I just stood there, feeling the distance between us stretch farther than ever. I turned away, knowing there was nothing left to say. I'll be staying at a hotel tonight, I said, my voice cold. Take your time. Think about what you want. And with that, I left her standing there with the divorce papers still in her hand. I expected resistance, but not like this. When I left that night, I thought Miranda would break down, maybe call me, try to reason with me. That's what wives do when they realize they're about to lose their husbands, right? They try to fix things, beg for another chance, promise they'll change. I was prepared for all of it. But she didn't call. She didn't text. She didn't chase after me. Instead, she went silent. And that silence unsettled me in a way I couldn't explain. I spent the night at the hotel, telling myself I had done the right thing. This was what I wanted. This was freedom. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Miranda wasn't reacting the way I expected. I had seen her go through so many emotions over the years: joy, frustration, sadness. But this was different. She wasn't devastated. She wasn't even angry. She was calculating. That's what bothered me. When I returned to the house a few days later to check in on things, I noticed the shift immediately. The divorce papers were still on the table, untouched. But Miranda wasn't avoiding me. She was watching me, studying me. Something had changed in her. "You're back earlier than I thought," she said casually, standing in the kitchen, cutting vegetables like nothing was wrong. I frowned. "I told you I'd be coming by." "Yes, but usually when you leave, you stay gone for longer." She didn't look up from her chopping, but her voice had an edge to it, like she was waiting for me to say something, like she knew something I didn't. I ignored the feeling creeping up my spine. "I just wanted to check in, see if you've thought about the papers." She finally looked up, setting the knife down on the cutting board. "I have." That's when I noticed it. The way she said it. The calmness. The certainty. I should have been relieved, but I wasn't. Because something in her eyes told me she wasn't going to make this easy. "I was thinking about Rufus," she continued, drying her hands on a towel. "About what this will mean for him." I exhaled sharply, already tired of this conversation. "Miranda, we've been over this. Rufus is almost an adult. He'll be fine." She tilted her head slightly. "Will he?" I clenched my jaw. "He's not a child, Miranda. He doesn't need us to stay together for his sake." Her expression didn't change. "Maybe not, but he does deserve honesty." I stiffened. There it was. The first real blow. What is that supposed to mean? I asked, keeping my voice steady. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms. "It means that something doesn't add up. You're in a rush to finalize this divorce, and for what? Convenience?" She studied me carefully, waiting for a reaction. "Or is there another reason?" I forced out a laugh, shaking my head. "This again? You think there's some grand conspiracy behind me wanting a divorce?" She shrugged. "I think people don't suddenly wake up one day and decide to throw away 16 years of marriage without a damn good reason." I didn't like where this was going. "Miranda, don't do this." I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. "We've been growing apart for years. We both know it. I'm just making it official." "Uh-huh," she murmured, unconvinced. Silence stretched between us, and for the first time, I felt like I was being backed into a corner. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. She wasn't supposed to question me. She was supposed to accept this, move on, leave without a fight. But now? Now she was investigating. And Miranda was a lot smarter than I ever gave her credit for. I cleared my throat, forcing my tone to remain even. "Look, I don't know what you think is going on, but I'm not hiding anything." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she studied me again, the way a scientist studies an experiment. "Okay," she finally said. "If that's the case, then you won't mind if I take my time before signing." I gritted my teeth. There it was. She was stalling. I was supposed to have everything wrapped up by fall. The timeline was tight, but necessary. I needed her out of the house, needed the paperwork filed, needed to move forward with Vicky and Ethan without any loose ends. And now Miranda was standing in my way. I couldn't afford this delay. "I don't understand," I said, forcing myself to sound reasonable. "What's the point of dragging this out? It's not going to change anything." She smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was knowing. "Maybe not, but I have a few things I need to figure out first." There it was again. That calm certainty. I felt a flicker of unease. I had been so sure that Miranda would accept the divorce quickly, that she wouldn't have the energy or will to fight it. But now? Now it felt like I was the one being cornered. And I didn't like it. Not one bit. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. Miranda was never the type to raise her voice or throw things. That wasn't her style. No, when she was truly angry, when she felt wronged, she got quiet. And I had been too arrogant, too sure of myself, to recognize that silence for what it was, a warning. She knew. I just didn't know how much. At first, I convinced myself she was only stalling out of spite. Maybe she wanted to drag things out, make things difficult just because she could. But then, little things started happening. She started making phone calls in another room, her voice hushed but firm. She started leaving the house more often, going places without telling me where she was going. She started watching me. It was the looks that got to me the most. The way she'd stare at me, her eyes sharp, like she was putting pieces together in her head. And then, one evening, she set the trap. I came by the house to check in, to push her again about the papers, to make sure she wasn't planning anything stupid. I walked in expecting another argument, another pointless delay. Instead, I found her sitting calmly at the kitchen table, waiting for me. There was a folder in front of her, thick, stuffed with documents. My stomach tightened. She didn't speak right away. She just gestured to the seat across from her. Sit. I didn't move. What's this? She tilted her head slightly. Just some things I've been looking into. I hesitated, but I didn't want to look rattled. So, I sat. Slowly. She opened the folder. The first thing I saw was a photo. A photo of me and Vicky. Me and Vicky at a restaurant. Me and Vicky outside an apartment complex. Me and Vicky at a park, with Ethan. Every single one, time-stamped. My throat went dry. She knew. All this time, I had been playing the role of the man making a clean break, the reasonable husband ending things because our marriage had run its course. But Miranda had seen right through it. She had hired someone. She had proof. I tried to keep my face neutral. I didn't reach for the papers, didn't react. And Miranda leaned forward slightly, studying me the way a detective studies a suspect. I have to admit, she said, voice smooth, deliberate, dangerous. I didn't expect you to be this thorough. 2 residences? Cameras set up in the decoy apartment to make it look like you were living there? A whole separate life running parallel to ours? That must have taken some serious effort. My fingers curled into fists under the table. You're being dramatic. She slid another document toward me. A bank statement. It showed wire transfers. Money being sent to Vicky. Every month. Regular. Consistent. My heart slammed against my ribs. I'm curious, Miranda said, tilting her head. At what point were you going to tell me about the child? Before or after the wedding? I forced a laugh. Miranda, you're grasping at straws. None of this. I met with my father-in-law. I froze. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. You know, the man you abandoned at the retirement home? The one you told me to forget about? Well, it turns out he still cares about his grandson. And his daughter-in-law. I felt my pulse in my throat. What did you do? What did I do? She let out a small, incredulous laugh. I did what I should have done a long time ago. I told him the truth. About you. About Vicky. About Ethan. I felt like the ground had been pulled out from under me, because I knew exactly what that meant. My father had money. He had property. He still owned the house Miranda and Rufus lived in, and I had always assumed, that all of it would go to me when he passed. But if Miranda had gotten to him first, I swallowed hard. You had no right. No right? Her eyes flashed. No right to tell the man you abandoned what his own son was doing? No right to let him make an informed decision before you waltzed back into his house and threw us out? You don't get to talk to me about rights, Andrew. My jaw clenched. He wouldn't cut me out. She slid another document toward me. It was an official petition for disinheritance. Signed. Notarized. Filed. You've spent years lying to him, avoiding him, treating him like he didn't exist, Miranda said, her voice like steel. But I didn't. And now? He's made his choice. The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. I reached for the paper, scanning it quickly. My father was formally cutting me off as his legal heir. All of his assets, including the house, would be transferred to Miranda and Rufus. I shot up from the chair. You manipulated him. She leaned back, unbothered. I told him the truth. You just didn't expect him to care. Rage burned under my skin. I had spent years building my perfect exit plan, and in a matter of weeks, Miranda had destroyed it. I turned away, gripping the back of the chair, trying to think. This doesn't change anything, I said finally, forcing my voice to stay level. The divorce is still happening. You'll have to leave. Miranda exhaled through her nose, amused. Actually, Andrew, you're the one who has to leave. I turned back, narrowing my eyes. What the hell are you talking about? She gestured around us. The house is in my name now, not yours. You don't get to throw me and Rufus out. You're the one who needs to pack. My mind spun. This wasn't how this was supposed to go. Miranda was supposed to be weak. She was supposed to fold. She was supposed to cry and scream, and then give up. But she hadn't. She had been planning. She had been waiting. And now, I was the one who had been backed into a corner. I clenched my fists. You think you've won? She smiled that infuriatingly calm smile. Oh, I know I have. And for the first time since this started, I believed her. I walked out of the kitchen, needing air, needing a moment to process everything Miranda had just thrown at me. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to break. She was supposed to crumble under the weight of the divorce, sign the papers, and leave quietly. But instead, she had flipped the entire game board over. She had gone to my father. She had gotten the house. She had made sure I was the one being thrown out instead of her. And worst of all, she knew everything. Vicky, Ethan, the second apartment, the bank transfers, the entire life I had been keeping in the shadows. It was all out in the open now. I ran a hand over my face, pacing the living room. My pulse was pounding. I needed to regain control. I needed to figure out a way to turn this around. I could fight the disinheritance. Maybe my father had filed it, but that didn't mean it was set in stone. Legal battles took time, and if I played it right, I could still. You're thinking about contesting it, aren't you? Miranda's voice snapped me out of my thoughts. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, arms crossed. Her expression wasn't smug, wasn't gloating. It was worse. It was calm. That meant she had more cards to play. I straightened, trying to maintain some control over the conversation. You can't just take everything from me. She raised an eyebrow. Funny, that's exactly what you were trying to do to me. I gritted my teeth. This is different. She tilted her head. How? I didn't answer. Because there was no good answer. I took a deep breath. You want money? Is that it? Fine. I'll make sure you and Rufus are taken care of. But you need to stop this. This is going too far. Her lips twitched. Oh, Andrew. You're still under the impression that I'm negotiating. Something cold settled in my stomach. What do you want? I asked slowly. Miranda stepped further into the room. I want what you never gave me, she said simply. Options. I frowned. What are you talking about? She let out a breath, her eyes scanning the room. For 16 years, I did everything right. I was the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect housekeeper. I put my own dreams aside to keep this family together. And you? You took that as permission to plan your escape behind my back. I shifted, uncomfortable. She kept going. You made every decision for me. You decided when this marriage ended. You decided when I should leave. You even decided that I had no right to this house, my home, because it was yours. She took a step closer. So now, I'm making the decisions. I clenched my jaw. And what decisions are those? Miranda gave me a long, measured look. You leave. I scoffed. Where am I supposed to go? She shrugged. Not my problem. My hands curled into fists. You really think you're going to get away with this? She smiled. That smile. The one that made my skin crawl because I knew that she had already won. You already signed the divorce papers, Andrew, she said softly. My heart stopped. Wait, what? She walked over to the side table and picked up a document. My signature was on it. I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. You signed it when we were discussing alimony, she interrupted. I told you I needed everything in writing. You didn't read it carefully, did you? I had read it. I just hadn't noticed. Oh God. The divorce was finalized. She smirked. And since you agreed to a fair division of assets, that means everything we negotiated is already legally binding. You know, the part where I get the house? Where you have to keep paying for Rufus's education? Where you agreed that you wouldn't contest anything? I couldn't breathe. She had played me. She had played me perfectly. She tilted her head. So, what was it you said earlier? Sign the papers and get out of the house with your son? She smiled, full of mock innocence. Oh, wait, that doesn't apply anymore, does it? I felt my vision blur with anger. This isn't over. Miranda sighed, like she was dealing with a stubborn child. It is, though, and if you keep pushing, I'll make sure the compensation you pay is doubled. I haven't even filed the adultery compensation claim yet. I froze. Adultery compensation. She could legally sue me for damages because I had been unfaithful during the marriage. She had proof. So much proof. She could drag this into court and ruin me completely. She took a step back. Smoothing her blouse like this was just another casual conversation. You should start packing. I already told my father-in-law you'd be gone by the end of the week. My breath came out slow, measured. I had lost. Completely. Miranda walked toward the door, then paused, turning back to me one last time. Oh, and one more thing? I looked up, barely keeping myself together. She smiled. That same infuriatingly calm smile. I have an announcement coming soon. I frowned. What kind of announcement? She shrugged. Let's just say Rufus and I won't be struggling financially anytime soon. And with that, she left. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she had just been. I had underestimated her. I had assumed she was just a housewife. But now, she had the upper hand. And I had no idea what she had planned next. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Everything I had worked toward, every careful plan, every calculated move, was gone. Miranda had flipped the entire situation against me, piece by piece, until I was the one standing with nothing. I was supposed to be the one leaving her behind. Now, I was the one getting kicked out. And the worst part? I still didn't know what her final move was. She had something planned. That much was clear. She had made it obvious before walking away. The way she had smirked, the way she had hinted at some kind of announcement. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. I needed to act fast. By morning, I had convinced myself there was still a way out. Maybe I had signed the divorce papers, but Miranda wasn't invincible. There had to be a loophole, a weakness, something I could use to turn things around before she delivered her next blow. I just had to find it. So, I went back to the house. This time, I wasn't alone. Vicky and Ethan were with me. Miranda had made her move. Now it was time for me to force the situation. Go ahead, she said smoothly. Take a look. I snatched it from her, flipping it open. And then, my heart stopped. It was a notarized document. Not just any document, an adultery compensation claim. Filed. Legal. Against me. My pulse roared in my ears. I flipped through the pages, skimming the details. Damages. Financial compensation. Court proceedings. I looked up sharply. You wouldn't. I did, she cut in, her voice infuriatingly calm. Since you lied about the reason for the divorce and were, in fact, having an affair, that changes everything. Vicky gasped beside me. Wait, what? Miranda. I turned, rage burning in my chest. I had walked in thinking I was in control. But Miranda had never been the helpless housewife I had convinced myself she was. I had underestimated her. And now, I had nothing left. I stormed out of that house, the house that was no longer mine. And Miranda? She didn't even look back. I should have known it wasn't over. Not really. Even after I stormed out of the house, even after Miranda destroyed every plan I had, I still thought maybe, just maybe, I could salvage something. But I was wrong. So wrong. Because the next blow came before I could even catch my breath. I had barely settled into my temporary rental when I got the call. From my father. I almost didn't pick up. The last conversation we had was before Miranda went to him, before she poisoned him against me. But something in my gut told me I needed to hear what he had to say. I pressed the phone to my ear. Dad. Silence. Then, his voice, cold, detached. I finalized the disinheritance. My stomach dropped. I gripped the phone tighter. Wait. What? You heard me, he said flatly. It's done. You are no longer legally entitled to anything I own. When I pass, every last cent will go to Miranda and Rufus. I saw red. Are you serious? My voice rose despite myself. You're leaving everything to her? To Rufus, he corrected sharply. To my grandson. The only one in this family who actually deserves it. I clenched my jaw. This is insane. She's not even your real daughter. No, my father agreed. But she's treated me better than you ever have. I felt my pulse pounding in my temples. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. She manipulated you. I snapped. You think she cares about you? She just wanted to use you to get back at me. He exhaled through the phone, unimpressed. No, Andrew. She wanted nothing from me. I'm the one who offered to adopt her. I'm the one who gave her the house. Because when I looked at how you treated her, I saw exactly the kind of man you've become, and I wanted no part of it. My grip on the phone was so tight it hurt. She turned you against me. No, Andrew, he said, voice tired. You did that all on your own. I slammed the phone down before I could say something I'd regret. I wanted to scream. To break something. This was not how this was supposed to go. I was supposed to be the one leaving Miranda behind. I was supposed to be the one with a fresh start, a new life with Vicky, a clean slate. Instead, I was alone, broke, disgraced. And then, because the universe apparently wasn't done laughing at me, I got another call from my boss. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. Hello? There was no small talk, no pleasantries, just a single question. Did you really use company resources to fund your mistress's expenses? The bottom dropped out of my stomach. I tried to stay calm. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't insult my intelligence, my boss snapped. We ran a financial audit. Your travel expenses, the company card charges, the fake business accommodations, it's all there. And if we can see it, do you have any idea how fast a legal team could rip you apart? My mind was racing. I had been careful. I had made sure everything looked clean. Hadn't I? I hadn't. Because Miranda had known. She had been waiting. She had let me think I was in control, let me think I was winning, all while digging my grave behind my back. Look, I said, forcing my voice to stay steady. I can explain. No, my boss cut in. You can't. Pack your things. You're done. Click. The call ended. I stared at the phone, my mind blank. No job, no house, no inheritance, no way out. And the worst part? I had done this to myself. I sank down onto the couch, running a hand over my face. What was I supposed to do now? I couldn't go to Vicky. She was already furious after finding out she could be sued for adultery. She was blaming me for everything. She had called me the night before, crying, furious. You lied to me, she had snapped. You told me you and Miranda were already over. I thought we were. I had defended. I thought it was just a formality. Well, now I might have to pay thousands of dollars because of you, she had hissed. Do you know what that means for me? For Ethan? I had tried to reassure her, to tell her we'd figure it out, but she had just laughed, cold, bitter. No, she had said, you'll figure it out. And then she had hung up. I hadn't heard from her since. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, trying to think. How had this gone so wrong? I had been so sure that Miranda was just a naive housewife. But the woman I had underestimated? She had outmaneuvered me at every turn. And now? Now, she was thriving. She had the house, the inheritance, the financial security. And me? I was just another man who lost everything to a woman he underestimated. You ever watch everything around you collapse and realize, too late, you were the one holding the match? Because that's exactly what happened to me. I lost the house. I lost my inheritance. I lost my job. And then, just when I thought things couldn't possibly get worse, Miranda delivered the final blow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic, public humiliation. It was a single email. One that landed in my inbox at precisely the right moment. As of today, all legal matters between us have been finalized. The court has approved the financial settlements regarding Rufus's tuition, adultery compensation, and your responsibility to cover the remaining costs as outlined in the agreement. Your first installment is due by the end of the month. Any delay will result in additional legal action. Also, I'd like to formally congratulate you. You've finally achieved what you wanted. You're free. Enjoy it. Best, Miranda. I stared at the screen. It wasn't the words themselves that got me. It was the tone, the finality of it, the way she sounded like she truly didn't care anymore. And that was worse than any screaming match, any fight, any revenge scheme I had imagined she'd pull. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even bitter. She was done. I wasn't even worth hating. And that realization sat like a stone in my chest. I had lost. Completely. But karma? Karma was just getting started. First, I tried to get another job. It should have been easy. I had experience, connections. But word spreads fast in the corporate world. And the story? Oh, the story spread even faster. The high-level executive who misused company funds for a mistress? The one who got sued for adultery and lost everything to his wife? No one wanted that liability in their company. One rejection turned into 5. 5 turned into 10. And by the end of the month, I was desperate. I reached out to old colleagues, anyone who might take pity on me, only to get the same response over and over again. Sorry, Andrew. We can't risk it. I was poisoned now. And Miranda? She was thriving. The one who got away the worst part? The part that burned the most? I saw her. Not in person. Not up close. But on TV. She was being interviewed. An entire segment dedicated to her success as a best-selling author. Because, apparently, Miranda had been writing novels for years. And her latest book? A massive bestseller. The title? The Splendid Deductions of Mrs. Rose. A detective series about a housewife who exposes liars and cheats. I felt sick. I watched as she sat there, confident, radiant, talking about her inspiration. This book started as an outlet, she said, smiling at the camera, a way for me to process certain experiences in my life. But as I wrote, I realized, sometimes, people underestimate the ones they think they know best. The host laughed. Sounds like there's a personal story in there. Miranda only smiled. Oh, isn't there always? If there was any hope left that I could at least start over with Vicky, that died quickly. After my demotion, after losing my job, after watching my bank account drain faster than I could fill it, Vicky snapped. She had been patient. For a while. But then the late rent notices started. The debt collectors called. And one day, I came home to find half the apartment empty. She left a note. It wasn't long. It wasn't even dramatic. Just one line, scrawled in ink. I didn't sign up for this. She took Ethan and left. And I couldn't even blame her. With no job, no Vicky, and no home, I was forced to downgrade. I moved into a cheap, one-bedroom apartment in a part of town I had never imagined myself living in. I had to sell my car, cancel every luxury I had taken for granted. And worst of all, I had to ask Miranda for an extension on the first alimony payment. That was the lowest moment of my life. I expected her to gloat, to mock me, to throw it in my face. She didn't. She simply responded, as long as Rufus's tuition is paid, I don't care when you send the rest. That was it. No emotion, no spite, just indifference. I had been erased from her life, and I finally understood what that meant. I had spent so long thinking I was trapping her, thinking I was freeing myself. But the truth? I was the one who had been trapped all along. And the moment I signed those papers, the moment I thought I had one, she had already let me go. And I had nothing left.